Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, a top White House official is visiting China. Many see the trip as a chance to lay the groundwork for a potential final meeting between Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping and President Biden before he leaves the Oval Office. China says it has no intention of invading any country's airspace. In response to protests from Japan, Tokyo said a Chinese spy plane breached its border despite a warning. Tensions are rising in the South China Sea. Now, a possible U.S. move involving Philippine ships could further stoke the flames. And after escaping human rights violations in China, a young man is pursuing his goals in the United States. He highlights the importance of preserving his Chinese heritage on the world stage and how the Chinese Communist Party is extending its suppression overseas. Zooming in on the most recent high-level exchange between Washington and Beijing, Tuesday, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan arrived in Beijing for a three-day visit to China. Here's Sullivan and China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi.
President Biden has been very clear in his conversations with President Xi that he is committed to managing this important relationship responsibly. And the outcomes of the Woodside Summit and the work we have done since then demonstrate that we are working to ensure that competition does not veer into conflict, and that we find ways to work together where our interests align.
Implementing the common understandings between our two presidents at their San Francisco meeting is our important responsibility.
The two officials are expected to discuss topics related to the military, Taiwan, and the fentanyl crisis. Sullivan's trip is in response to Wang's invitation. Before this meeting, two key officials have met 4 times in just a year and a half. Sullivan's trip doesn't seem geared toward any strategic breakthroughs, but aims to stabilize the critical bilateral ties. Many also believe his trip could lay a foundation for a potential final meeting between China's Xi and President Biden before he steps down in January. 2 high-ranking diplomats from the U.S. and China are talking about regional stability, and now Beijing has responded to a dispute with Japan. Japan voiced anger on Tuesday after a Chinese spy plane intruded on its airspace. China's foreign ministry said, quote, China has no intention of invading the airspace of any country, adding the incident is still under investigation. One day earlier, on Monday, Japan's defense ministry said a Chinese military aircraft flew over Japan's border for about 2 minutes. Tokyo said this was the first time ever that the Chinese military breached its airspace. Looking back, Chinese aircraft had previously intruded on what was considered disputed airspace. Once by an aircraft operated by a Chinese state agency in 2012, and once by drone owned by the Chinese Coast Guard in 2017. But the latest incident was the first occasion the breached airspace was an undisputed zone. In recent years, Japan has been taking a stronger stance on countering the Chinese Communist Party's influence. The island country is a crucial ally of the United States in the Indo-Pacific region. But what makes Japan so important? To start, it's the world's 4th largest economy. In 2022, bilateral U.S.-Japan trade in goods and services totaled $309 billion. As a top exporter of electronics, vehicles, machinery, and more, Japan has a major impact on global supply chains and advanced technology. It's home to global industry giants like Toyota, Sony, and Panasonic. Japan also has one of the biggest defense budgets globally, spending more than $50 billion a year. Its 2024 budget sets aside more than $8 billion for air and missile defense, with a focus on countering North Korea's growing missile threats. Beyond that, the U.S. operates military bases on the Japanese side of Okinawa, with around 18,000 Marines stationed there. It's only 400 miles from Taiwan. In the event of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, the U.S. soldiers stationed there would very likely be the first to respond. That air base, called Kadena, also helps protect the first island chain, blocking Chinese submarines from being able to enter the Pacific Ocean undetected, where they would be difficult to detect by U.S. defense radars. Now we zoom in on tensions in the South China Sea. A top admiral says U.S. ships could potentially escort Philippine vessels on resupply missions. This follows confrontations between the Philippines and China over the past week, plus a longer string of incidents in recent months. Here's Commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Sam Paparo.
Would the U.S. consider, certainly within the context of consultations, every option between the two sovereign nations in terms of our mutual defense? Escort of one vessel to the other is an entirely reasonable option within our mutual defense treaty among this close alliance between the two of us.
Paparo was speaking to reporters at a military forum organized by the Indo-Pacific Command.
In this region, China, although without saying it, and I'll say it for you, is the biggest disruptor of international peace in the ASEAN region.
Beijing's claim over nearly all of the South China Sea has angered neighboring countries whose exclusive economic zones are affected. China has intensified aggressive actions in the area despite a 2016 international ruling rejecting these claims. The U.S. has warned it is obligated to defend the Philippines if its military is attacked in the region, raising concerns of a potential conflict.
Under a mutual defense treaty, the U.S. could be drawn into the conflict if China attacks the Philippines. The treaty requires the U.S. and the Philippines to come to each other's aid if a third party were to attack either of them. The South China Sea is crucial for global shipping, with about 1/3 of global trade passing through its waters. Its plentiful fishing grounds, oil and gas reserves are also crucial for neighboring countries, including Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Brunei. Two key areas of tension in the South China Sea between China and the Philippines are within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. Despite that, Beijing claims the same areas as its own. Recently, the Philippine military condemned 2 Chinese jets for dropping flares in front of a Philippine patrol plane in the disputed area. Manila said the move could have caused a crash. The U.S. maintains a strong interest in ensuring freedom of navigation and countering China's expansive territorial claims. Last month, Washington pledged an unprecedented military aid package to the Philippines worth $500 million. This April, the U.S. also strengthened its network of Asia alliances as a key part of its foreign policy. Washington invited Japan and the Philippines to build a shared defense network. When the Chinese Communist Party sought to deny a child's right to be born and educated, his family refused to give him up. 2 decades later, that child became a principal dancer with the world's leading classical Chinese dance company, thriving on the free soil of America. NTD's Flora Hua brings us his inspiring story.
Hong Wei-sung is a principal dancer with New York-based company Shenyun Performing Arts. Each year, he tours the world with the classical Chinese dance group, performing in some of the globe's most renowned theaters. But long before he even took his first breath, his very right to exist was ruled illegal under China's infamous one-child policy. Under Chinese law, the one-child policy was active from 1980 to 2016. In an interview with Chinese NTD host Yu Xin, Hong Wei's mother revealed the pivotal decision she made that ultimately saved her son's life.
At that time, I already had a son, and having a second child was forbidden. But I was already pregnant, so what could we do? Hiding meant risking our house being demolished and our friends and loved ones being implicated. And if we had the child, we'd face heavy fines. So my husband and I decided we couldn't stay in China and risk losing our baby. We planned to leave, and after discussing it with my father-in-law, we decided to go to Taiwan.
Hong Wei's grandfather was already living in Taiwan. After Hong Wei's mother arrived, Hong Wei was born and was registered under his grandfather's household, making him a Taiwanese citizen. But the family's tribulations were far from over. Hong Wei's mother practices Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, It's a spiritual discipline based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, and is rooted in traditional Chinese culture. The Chinese Communist regime has been suppressing religious believers and faith groups since it took power. When Hongwei was 6, his mother was arrested and spent 7 years in prison for refusing to so-called convert, a tactic used to force people to renounce their beliefs. Her arrest further fueled the regime's repression of Hongwei's family. Authorities refused to enroll him in Chinese middle schools due to his Taiwanese passport and his mother's beliefs. Undeterred, Hongwei's family sent him to Taiwan for school, where he began studying classical Chinese dance. Later, he received an offer to study at the New York-based Philippine Academy of Arts, which trains artists for Shenyun Performing Arts.
Studying at Philippine is very different from my experience in mainland China. The environment here is supportive because everyone practices Falun Dafa and upholds truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. Unlike in the mainland, where I was always wary, I now feel more confident and cheerful thanks to the influence of my fellow classmates.
After years of studying classical Chinese dance, Hongwei now teaches it himself. He says he's dedicated to preserving traditional Chinese culture and raising awareness to stop the persecution of Falun Gong in China.
Hongwei, what did you learn at Shenyun? Actually, for you, without the persecution, you might have pursued a different career and may not become an exceptional dancer, right? Given that all Shenyun performers are top tier, what did you gain from your experience there?
In Shenyun, one thing I particularly want to thank Shenyun for is I found my purpose in life in Shenyun. I believe that one's life is not just about daily routines. You need to find out what you want to do and what you enjoy doing. I found it in Shenyun. I feel I've found my purpose in life, which is to be part of Shenyun to restore traditional Chinese culture and expose the persecution that is happening in China.
But Hongwei adds he has witnessed and experienced transnational suppression by the Chinese regime, even on American soil.
During our performances, they would send threatening letters to theaters saying you should not allow Shenyun to perform or they would sever ties, etc. Sometimes they've also damaged our vehicles, preventing us from performing normally. But essentially, their evil tactics did not affect our performances, though they have caused us significant losses. So it's been quite a tough journey for us. And then we want to make it clear to international audiences that the CCP is not only in China, it's infiltrating the whole world using those malicious methods. Speaking from my own experience, I am someone who has been through this persecution, so I feel I have even more of a duty to expose this persecution.
Hongwei endured repression under the Chinese Communist regime, but now he celebrates freedom, arts, and culture in America. Hongwei says he has one more wish: to perform with Shenyun inside China without fear in the future. Flora Hua, NTD News.
Coming up, Temu's Chinese owner losing over $50 billion in market value after a record stock plunge, plus other red flags rise over China's economy. More than 70 are dead after attacks in Pakistan. The Prime Minister says militants there want cooperation with China to stop as Beijing steps up its involvement in a resource-rich region. More on the attack and reactions to it.
The terrorists' main motive is to drive a wedge between Pakistan and China.
And the iconic anthem of the 2019 Hong Kong pro-democracy movement, Glory to Hong Kong, continues to get canceled worldwide. Now by major Western tech giants like Spotify and Apple. More on the song's disappearance after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Another red flag is rising for China's economy. The owner of online shopping giant Temu, called PDD Holdings, saw its biggest stock plunge to date on Monday, an almost 30% drop. The company lost over $50 billion in market value. This after its second quarter revenue came in lower than expected. PDD CEO said profits would inevitably decline as China's economic growth slows down. He reiterated the statement at least 8 times. But PDD isn't alone. Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba saw its net income drop 28% in June. Din Tai Fung, one of the most popular restaurants in China, said it was closing over a dozen branches. And Starbucks saw a 14% drop in its revenue from its cafes in China this June. China's restaurant industry is in crisis. In the first half of this year, over 1 million restaurants have closed inside the country. According to a Chinese restaurant industry platform, China's restaurant sector is suffering, forcing many eateries to close their doors. And the trend goes beyond small businesses. High-end restaurant chains are struggling too. Even Chinese coffee giant Luckin Coffee has seen its profits decline by 50% compared to the same period last year. Luckin Coffee is listed on the U.S. stock market. Would you buy an affordable electric vehicle made in China? These low-priced cars have already made Western automakers and politicians wary, leading the U.S. and Canada to announce a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs. That's as they cite threats to local jobs and national security. To help us break down the stakes, we're joined by John Pelson, author of Wireless Wars. John Pelson, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Good to be here again, Tiffany.
We've heard from Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo saying that these smart cars are like smartphones on wheels. They have the same level of, surveillance. And she was also raising that concern that, imagine hundreds of thousands of these cars on American roads that could be turned off by one button inside Beijing. Given all of those concerns, when it comes to these tariffs, do you see people buying more, homegrown cars, or will they still pay those tariffs and buy the Chinese ones?
China will sell them at a non-market price. They've got this overcapacity that they've, I think, deliberately created. Part of it is just bad management because they're trying to control their own economy. But part of it is deliberate effort to flood the market, and they do that by creating overcapacity in their own production. But it should be a real concern for anyone to be buying a car where data is all managed in China. The servers are in China for your Polestar car or any other Chinese-controlled car company. Volvo is now owned and controlled by China, and therefore the Chinese Communist Party can tell the owners and the managers of it, here's what we want to do, here's the information we want. And under the Chinese intelligence laws, they're not allowed to deny them that information. So I'd be worried what they can learn about you, and I'd be worried, one of the last bastions of personal freedom is being able to get into your car in America and decide where you're going to go. It's not a bus, it's not a train, it's not an airplane. No one can block you from doing that. With an EV, that's a different story. That can be turned off or on or modified. They can change your speed. If they want to say this car won't go any faster than such and such miles an hour, I would hate turning that over to the Chinese government for my own personal vehicle.
When it comes to how the U.S. will deal with communist China, Trump has said he'd continue levying punishing tariffs on China. Well, Kamala Harris hasn't given much detail, but she did say in her acceptance speech last Thursday that, quote, America, not China, will win the competition for the 21st century. Now, given all of the tensions we are seeing, though, what kind of message should the U.S. be sending to ensure deterrence?
Well, if we think about it as a competition, we got a problem right off the bat. Competition is what companies do with each other. General Motors competes with Toyota. We're not competing with China. This is really a war by other means. And we need to recognize that this is not them trying to make more money or grow their companies. This is an effort for China to expand itself geopolitically around the world. And economics are secondary to them. And their goal is not to get rich like every other country and get their people better housing and health care and food. Their goal is to extend their power in the world, and this is just another means.
John Pelson, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
China's global ambitions are taking a hit. Pakistan's prime minister says recent attacks by separatist militants are aimed at stopping the country's cooperation with China. The violent incidents began on Sunday, killing more than 70 people. Take a listen.
The militants want the resource-rich province to secede. Major China-led projects, such as a port and a gold and copper mine, are located there. The projects are part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. There are reportedly development commitments worth $65 billion. Pakistan has not been able to fully build the infrastructure needed to tap mineral resources in poverty-stricken Balochistan. It has sought China's help in developing the province.
Glory to Hong Kong. The anthem of Hong Kong's 2019 pro-democracy protests has been taken down from streaming platforms Apple Music and Spotify around the world. NTD's Sean Marshall has more on why the song's creator says it sets a dangerous precedent and that similar incidents are now likely to follow.
A song the Chinese Communist Party said had to be stopped. The unofficial national anthem of the Hong Kong people. Now its writer says the song is being canceled around the world. Apple Music and Spotify have reportedly taken down the official version of Glory to Hong Kong worldwide. When we asked them why, they didn't respond. One publicist says this is the first time he's heard anything like this happening in the music world.
Why would the US and other countries, why would music distributors give in to this and say, okay, we'll take it down? And I'm just curious about who had a conversation with who, here in the States and other countries to make that happen.
Glory to Hong Kong was written in 2019 during mass pro-democracy protests. The Hong Kong people rejected being ruled by the CCP, and they sang the song at demonstrations every day. To suppress the people, the CCP forced a highly challenged national security law. Chinese Communist Party then labeled Glory to Hong Kong a weapon, and the island's courts outlawed it. The song's artist says the censorship is not limited to that one song. DGX has entire albums of protest music, but it says Apple Music has not approved their release, and they don't know why. DGX also said that they're struggling to find another label to carry the song, but you can still listen on YouTube and Ganjing World. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.